Hey, what's happening, everybody? I'm Bob Wankel alongside Anthony Sanfilippo. Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up, a Phillies podcast. And we're coming off of a pretty big weekend here where the Phillies take 4 out of 5 against the Washington Nationals. They did what they were supposed to do. They're 4 games over 500. They're on the fringe of a wild card spot as they head down to Texas for a quick 2-game series with the Rangers before a 4-game set with the San Diego Padres. And Anthony will bring you in here. Phillies did what they were supposed to do against 2 weaker division opponents. A refreshing change of pace, no?
Yeah, it's a good change of pace, Bob. One I wish that I had here this morning. Don't get old. Whatever you do, Bob, don't get old. Before we really dive into the Phillies, seriously, this is going. I don't want to take up too much time. But we're recording 25 minutes later than I had requested, and it's all my fault. And it's because, I had to get ready for an event today, and usually it used to take me 10 minutes to be able to get ready. I'll be in and out of the shower, get dressed 10 minutes. Now it takes me that long just to get the right temperature of the water in the shower. I don't know what happened. How did I get so slow? So don't get old, okay? Everything I do is much longer than it used to be.
See, I don't think it's me. I think it's everybody around me. It's my wife. It's my kid. I'm usually the guy. If you say be there at 8 o'clock, I'm sitting in the parking lot at 7:55, ready to go.
Yeah.
Now I say I'll get there at 8 o'clock, and I'm there at 8:40 if I'm lucky. So
I don't know what happens. But anyway, no, you're 100% right about the Phillies. I mean, we talked about this. We would have been happy with 3 out of 5 in Washington, and they took the 4th one. And a couple of those games were a little hairier than they needed to be against a bad team. But last year's team would have lost those games. This year's team won those games, and that's the fine line, right? Sometimes you always talk about how close it is between the difference between winning and losing, being a winning team and being a losing team. It's such a fine line in sports. Well, there's your fine line. If you wanted to compare the Phillies of 2021 versus the Phillies of 2022, the fine line is they blew those games last year. They're winning those games this year, and that's the difference. And that's why we think that. I think that's why you feel and I feel they're both they're a better team this year and are probably a playoff team this year.
So it's very interesting if you go back to the start of the Marlins series, and let's just kind of walk through this momentarily. So. Phillies win the opener against Alcantara. It's a great win. You have the Rhys Hoskins walk-off. And it looks like in the second game, the Tuesday night game, they're going to win the series, clinch the series at that point. And they have just about as bad of a loss as you can possibly have. Jerry's Familia struggles. Corey Knebel implodes, ends up then losing his job as a closer. And then they come back in the rubber match, and they don't do anything. They don't hit. They blow opportunity after blown opportunity. Rhys Hoskins turns an inside-the-park homer into a triple, gets stranded. Looks like it's going to be one of their flattest, most dismal losses of the season, and more of the same against a Marlins team that's really had their number over the last, handful of years here. So then they get the walk-off by Garrett Stubbs, and I'm building towards something here. They come out in the opener against the Nationals, and they blow Washington's doors off. But then after that, they played a bunch of games where it could have gone either way, extra innings, some blown saves, some weirdness late in games, and they survive, and they end up winning the first 4 games of the series, take 4 out of 5. They don't care who you're playing. On the road, 4 out of 5 is pretty damn good. Cannot argue with it. But the reason why I kind of do this slow build-up is if you watch the Phillies play those 3 games against Miami and those 5 games against Washington, I just want to ask you this. Were you impressed with what you watched? I know they went 6-2. I know they're in a good spot right now. But did you take away from that, wow, I'm really impressed with what I'm watching from this team right now? And I ask you that because we skew negative. And I felt myself going a little negative this weekend.
Well, I'll give you a hedge answer. Was I impressed by the baseball? No. Was I impressed by how they were resilient and able to overcome their shortcomings and overcome their mistakes, which they have not been able to do in the past? Yes, that's where I was impressed. Right. And I think there were mistakes all around. There were mistakes by the manager. There were mistakes in the field. There were mistakes everywhere. It was just kind of frustrating a couple of times. But they found a way, and that's what you do when you're not always going to be playing the best game. You're not always going to be playing your worst game. You're a lot of the times, most of the time, you're going to be somewhere in the middle, and finding the way to win when you're not at your best is what's important. Like, you got to win those games more often than not. And they're finding ways to win those middle of the road games where they're not at their best. That's important. Those are the games that matter the most. And it's funny, you go back and look at championship seasons by any team, right? I'm sure that they have dozens of games like this. And you sit there and go, man, they really weren't playing well, but wow, they somehow won 9 out of 12 in those games.
Yeah,
how did that happen?
You look at them right now, and they go 11-11 in April, 10-18 in May, and they're 15-3 in June. They've scored 108 runs. They've given up 72. I mean, they're winning at an 83.3% clip right now. I'm not complaining. I'm not arguing, and that's kind of what I was driving at. It's like they haven't played their best baseball through this entire stretch, but now they're starting to win games where they've been less than 100%, not firing on all cylinders. And in a way, oddly enough, I mean, you want to see the bullpen hold leads late. You want to see them come out and beat bad pitchers. The bats kind of went quiet at times over the weekend against a pretty, I would say, substandard pitching staff in Washington. But they still won the games, and I do think that there's something to be said for winning ugly, winning when you're not totally clicking. And as you said, this is something that this team has not done, or has certainly done often enough in recent years.
Well, keep in mind too. I mean, you were down Harper a couple of games.
Yeah, I was going to get.
The one game you played without Harper, you also played without Hoskins, who has been pretty good for you of late. So, I mean, you were putting kind of together some piecemeal lineups, too, that you say, well, the hitting was inconsistent. Okay, well, you were not – the top of the order has been so good, and then all of a sudden now you take your 2 and 3 hitter out of the lineup.
Right.
That's going to change things. So I kind of give them a little bit of a pass on being offensively inconsistent, especially against Washington. That can't continue here, obviously – especially against San Diego. I mean, Texas isn't terrible, but their pitching's not good. So I think that offensively, the Phillies will still be okay there. But you can't be like that you can't be inconsistent against the Padres and expect to win.
I think the one thing that jumped out at me watching them play, really dating back to the beginning of the Marlins series, this has been going on all year. Now, they've had bullpen issues. Sometimes the bullpen sets up these situations. They force these situations. Sometimes the bullpen has ruined some really good moments like we've talked about previously. But it feels like at this point in the season, just being in the middle of June here, trending towards the back end of June, this team has had so many clutch, late inning, big at-bats, and big wins on top of it. And like I said, obviously some of those wins have been spoiled, but I just feel like the one thing that when you stand back and you get the day off and you're not watching every inning and kind of grinding through every at-bat and overanalyzing everything, is just like, Jesus, this team, they've had a number of just crazy games, crazy wins. You use the word resilient. We've used it a lot on this show. It's hard not to watch this and kind of say, yeah, there's a lot of flaws, but damn, there's just something about this team where they make it interesting, And
I'll give you a guy, Bob, that really talk about, those clutch late game at bats, and I don't have any statistical data on this. This is just from memory and what I've watched, what I've seen, and statistically he's not having a great year. He was hot earlier, but now he's just kind of like meh. Mm-hmm. Is Alec Bohm? I just seem to think when the games seem to matter is when he comes through late in the game. Like, always seems like here comes Alec Bohm. He's up here in the eighth or ninth inning or even extra innings, and it's one out. They're down a run, and he finds a way to get a single or finds a way to hit that double in the gap. And it's like, where the hell is this coming from? Like, this guy is actually pretty clutch in those spots, and I don't necessarily know if there's a way of like looking at where he's at. I mean, I know Baseball Reference has those late and close stats, but I don't think that that's always what I'm talking about. Like, I don't think that's always what you're looking at and saying, oh, okay, that'll really show you, because I don't think it does. I think you just have to look at those specific, like you said, specific situations, and you find that the guy comes up in those spots and just delivers. And he's delivering at those spots more than he is at any other point in the game. The rest of the game, he's kind kind of missing at times.
It's interesting because I agree with you. I mean, it feels like when he's gotten his hits, they've been well timed. He's been in the middle of some really key sequences for this team. And it's just an interesting player, and I think that when you talk about Alec Bohm, there's always like this really intense debate about what he is and what he can be, and is he really truly a valuable player? And to kind of, I guess, go through this, I mean, you look at his splits in all of these individual situations, and to be blunt, they're bad. I mean, if you just look, I mean, I'll talk about the numbers that you were speaking to in a moment, and they're not good.
There is one that's good.
But like, if you look at where he's at for the month of June, 71 at bats. I mean, the guy's hitting 211 with a 539 OPS. That's terrible. But you go into the late and close, right? I mean, he's hitting 256 with a 663 OPS.
But go by inning and look at the ninth inning.
Ninth inning. Let's see. Here we go. He's hitting 455 in the ninth inning. Yeah. So he's 10 for 25 in the ninth inning with a double and a home run. And I mean, so he has had some big hits in the ninth. And it's interesting, though, because like if they grade it out, if you go behind that, I think or above that, we're looking at the same thing now, like high leverage situations, hitting 200. But it kind of goes to your point, like the numbers aren't really good. If you watch him day in, day out, you're kind of like underwhelmed by him, I think. But there have been just, like I said, a number of sequences where he's provided, if not the game-tying hit or the go-ahead hit, a hit that sets up that big moment, And
right.
Like kind of like pass the baton type of thing.
And it's more of that. You're 100% right. It's more of that. He's not been the guy that's getting the big hit, but he's the guy that's allowing the big hit to happen.
Unless it was against Josh Hader in the ninth at Milwaukee. Now I'll give you that one.
Yeah, but see, you're right. But you know what, though? More people will remember that Vierling hit the walk-off than will that Alec Bohm hit the tying home run.
He's just such an interesting player because the one thing I have to say, and I have gotten an opportunity, I mean, heck, he was on our show. I've talked to Ruben Amaro Jr. frequently, but he was on, and if you watch the Father's Day broadcast on Peacock, if you're able to find it, I know that Philadelphia is melting down about it, but when you talk about Alec...
I got a great story about that, by the way.
Can't wait. But when you talk about Alec Bohm, it's always like, well, he had the meltdown earlier in April, and since then he's been pretty good, and he's really swung the bat really well. And I'm like, that's not really true. He's been functional at third base. Certainly he's been better than what he was in that meltdown game against the Mets, but he's still a very average at best third baseman who's not really hitting enough to offset his mediocrity as a defensive third baseman. I think when you watch him, though, you see some of these moments that we're talking about. You see the size. Occasionally he will go through spurts where he drives the ball, and you're just hoping that with more bats that this gets unlocked. But it's hard to kind of to bank on that at this point.
Let me ask you this about him, Bob. Do you think that, and I think one of the problems with Bohm is he obviously he doesn't walk, he doesn't get on, his on base is really bad. But do you think it's a situation where they're not worried about that right now? They just want him to go up there and have an aggressive enough approach till he gets comfortable enough hitting the ball in those situations, and then down the road it'll be like, okay, now that you've got that, now let's work on being more selective. Do you think that's more of a team instructional thing with him? As opposed, because when he came up as a rookie, he seemed to have that ability to take those pitches, take close pitches, and work some walks. And then now all of a sudden he doesn't do it anymore. He's much more aggressive and it swings a lot of pitches than he didn't used to then. And I'm wondering if it's more of a team-focused approach to try and get him to be a more consistent hitter.
Yeah, there may be something to that, and I think that the Phillies at this point, considering where they're at from an offensive standpoint, now obviously having more guys hit for power and elite production is better than having less guys. But I do think where their lineup's at and as productive as it's been, they're top 5 in a lot of major categories, run production, OPS, things of that nature. So I think that they are probably just saying, this is fine. This is adequate for now. I kind of always look at it and say, but then what? Like, where are we at 2 years from now? Does he factor in 2024? Is this a guy that they can kind of bank on if Rhys Hoskins isn't here? Can they move him across the infield and let him play first base? And so what I start to do when I see a player like this, and we talk about the big hits, but then sort of being underwhelmed on the daily, like this is where I always like to try to bring in the deeper numbers and start to look at things. And it's bizarre. Like, if you look at the Baseball Savant, the StatCast numbers, he's hitting the ball less hard. Like, his exit velocity is 89.9. Last year it was 92 miles an hour, so that's down, right? And his hard hit percentage is actually down as well. But when you look at expected batting average, like, check this out. So he hits 338 his rookie year, and everybody goes crazy. But his expected batting average was 285, which would then suggest to you there's some luck involved to these events happening. In 2021, he hits 247 with a 261 expected batting average. Now, this year, he's at 252, but the expected batting average is the highest of his 3-year career, which is 295. And he should have and his slugging percentage is actually higher, or is lower than it was as a rookie, but his expected slugging percentage is as highest as it should have been, or that has been to this point. So I guess what I'm saying is, I know I'm kind of like getting lost in the numbers here. The deeper analytical numbers suggest that he should be hitting for a better average, and his slugging percentage should be higher than it's played.
Yeah, and that's why I asked what I asked, because when I kind of feel the same way. And again, I'm not the analytics guy, right? But I mean, I think that those numbers that you just gave us, those analytic numbers, match up with what we're seeing from the guy, it makes me wonder, like, okay, is he seems to be swinging at more pitches. He seems to be, and maybe that's why those expected numbers should be a little bit higher, because he is at least making contact. And also, you said, well, why is the exit velocity down? Again, he's probably swinging at pitches that he didn't used to swing at, and maybe a couple of them are out of the strike zone.
Agree.
So that, you know what I'm saying, and that brings that number down. But I think that has to be in my mind, that has to be an organizational approach with him, because of how bad it went for him last year. Like, they kind of let's remake Alec Bohm. He's not going to be a 338 hitter like we saw in his rookie season, but we can't have him be what he was last season when he got sent down. So let's find out what he is. Be aggressive. We have hitters around you. This is the kind of season you could do that. And then when you're 25 and 26, that's when we'll work on really, really finding, being your selectivity.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, his strikeout rate has decreased from 26.6 last season to 22.3 this season. And you look at that number and you go, well, that's not that big of a deal. But when you take those two numbers and just look at the decrease on percentage, it's substantial. Yeah. So, I mean, he is putting more balls in play at a higher rate, and I do think that probably lends to some of the contact numbers skewing the way that they have here. In terms of exit velocity, hard hit percentage, barrels, all that stuff. So, okay, I have a question for you then. Let's reset this. They come into this Texas series 4 games over 500, and I went through some numbers here. I always like to just take a peek at the projections and playoff odds, and you had said earlier in the show that you believe this is a playoff team. We've sort of, I think, other than when they were 9 games under 500 or whatever it was, 8 games under 500, I, for the most part, believe that this is a playoff team. I just thought they were starting to dig themselves such a hole that it would be almost impossible to get out of, but lo and behold, 15-3 in the month of June. So, Fangraphs, 41.3% Phillies postseason odds this morning. 538 has them at 48%, and Baseball Reference 43.5%. So, take a look at these numbers. Basically, what all three are saying is that it is more likely than not that the Phillies will miss the postseason. So, we'll work through this 2 different ways. One, your first reaction to that. I know that you're not real big on the playoff projections and odds. I know that. I'm setting this up. So, I'll let you speak to that first, and then I'll ask this question a different way.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, they are what they are. I think that they're mostly for conversational purposes. Basically, computers saying, "Well, yeah, this is what's going to happen," and it doesn't take into account any human element which affects the outcome of games.
Yeah, so, I mean, those numbers don't have the Rob Thompson effect to them, is what you're saying.
Exactly. But again, and I feel like I beat a dead horse, because I do think that there are 2 teams that the Phillies are absolutely better than, talent-wise, and ultimately will play out.
You're getting ahead of my question now.
Well, go ahead. I'll let you ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, so I have it written down right here in my notes. Who are the Phillies better than? So here they are, right? This is wild card now. You have the Padres at 42-27, have the first wild card. The Braves right now at 39-29. They beat the Giants last night in the series opener. They have the second wild card, and the Giants are hanging on right now to that third wild card at 37-29. The Cardinals are a half game behind, and they're also jockeying for the NL Central with Milwaukee. And then you have the Phillies, and then you have nobody else. Everybody else in the National League is absolutely abysmal.
Yeah, it's eight teams for 6 spots,
Yes.
is what it is. And if I'm going to actually, I could probably argue that they're better than 3 teams, but I'll just say at least 2 for now. I think that they're better than Milwaukee. I really do. Milwaukee relies way too much on good starting pitching and good back end of the bullpen. Has no lineup, has no middle bullpen. And I think
they hit home runs, Milwaukee, though. I mean, Milwaukee, they do hit home runs.
I know they've won 4 in a row, and that's how they've kind of like gotten back ahead of the Cardinals here. I don't see, over the long haul, I don't see it. I think that they're going to really need to add. Look, if the Brewers add, like the Braves did at the deadline last year, and add 3 guys who could come in and really kind of impact their lineup, like the Braves did, well, then it's a different story. Then we're having a different conversation, right? Because their pitching is good enough to get them through. But I think right now, as the teams are constituted, and I think we saw it when they played Milwaukee, the Phillies are a better team. The Phillies are just a better team than the Brewers. And I think that they're better than the Giants, although the Giants have surprised me a little bit lately. I know they lost the last 2, but prior to that, they got on a little bit of a run. And you know, I think that they had won 7 of 8 prior to that. Mm-hmm. So that was a team that I was like, okay, they're ripe for the picking. They're going to start to fall off. We're going to see it, and that's who the Phillies and Braves are going to catch. Well, the Braves did catch them, but the Braves won 14 in a row. I think the Phillies are going to catch San Francisco ultimately, and I think that they're honestly probably better than St. Louis. The thing about the Cardinals is I think the Cardinals have that devil magic with them, man. And you know, these veteran guys going for one last ride together. I mean, I think that there's just something about them that's going to get them in to the playoffs. I think they're going to win the Central. But if you ask me, are the Phillies a better team than the Cardinals? Probably. But the thing of it is, one of St. Louis or Milwaukee has to win the division. So you can't say, well, they're better than both of them. Well, that knocks them out.
I'm with you. I mean, obviously the trade deadline can alter things here, but I think that the Cardinals probably do win the NL Central, and I think that the Phillies are better than the Brewers, and I'm with you. I tend to believe that they're better than the Giants at this point, but I guess that remains to be seen. I will tell you, some of these computer models, though, we talk about them all the time, and some of these computer models actually like the Giants more than they like the Padres, which is. I
was just about to say this about the Padres. You know, what's Machado's injury? Have we seen an update on Machado's injury?
He got out for a while. I mean, I think it's pretty bad sprain is the last we saw.
Yeah. Okay. So Machado's going to be out. Okay. So that's not good. We saw what happened last year when they had a couple of injuries when Tatis went down. You know, obviously he's not even really back yet. And then they're surviving on their pitching again. Another team that survives on pitching, but they don't have the pitching depth. Last year that killed them when they all of a sudden they had a couple of injuries to their pitching rotation, and they were desperate enough to use Jake Arrieta and Vince Velasquez, right, to try and survive, and couldn't, and they fell right the hell out of it after the deadline. Right. So maybe that's why I think there might be a little bit of smoke and mirrors with the Padres. I mean, you start taking their best players out of the lineup, and then cross your fingers that pitching doesn't get hurt. That could be another team, and I think that we'll see a lot will this weekend. I think when we watch this 4-game series between the Phillies and Padres, will let us know where these two teams are against one another.
Yeah, and with Machado, he was out of the lineup in the series opener against the Diamondbacks. They're doing that whole thing right now where they're hoping that he can avoid the IL stint. I feel like I've seen this a million times with the Phillies. Not to say this is what's going to happen with Machado, but they're using words like he's pretty banged up. It's blue and purple, but we're optimistic. And then 4 days later they have to IL a guy. I feel like that may be where this is headed, but. Then again, I guess I wouldn't be surprised if he's out there running around against the Phillies this weekend either. So we'll kind of see. But it is interesting. You would think at some point the NL West being what it is with the Dodgers and the Padres and the Giants that these teams would begin to beat each other up. And really, you might see that a little bit in the NL East. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the Braves and Mets have only played each other 4 times so far this season. So they're going to see each other a ton down the stretch. I guess, what is that, another 14, 15 games they would play one another from here on out.
It's why I think the Braves are still going to win the division. Ultimately, I think the Mets are a wild card team and the Braves win that division. But I mean, that's the reason why they haven't played. I mean, I felt like the Mets got off to a great start, and not to knock them. I mean, they've been better. They've been better than I.
The DeGrom, Scherzer doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, they've been better than I thought they were going to be.
Because
I'll admit it.
When I look at the standings, I kind of go, you can cut down an 8-game lead on the New York Mets as the New York Mets are constructed. They've played over their heads. They've had this magical ride. Credit to them. But then when I think about it, I kind of say, all right, well, if a team were to add Max Scherzer in July, and a team were to add Jacob deGrom in July, if they were to add both of those guys, no team in the National League stands to add more than the Mets do moving forward. Now, I know that they're getting good starting pitching to begin with, so how much better can it be? Can they stay on the field? How effective will they be? Right. But, man, there's still 2 big names to kind of pin down at the end here.
And you're not wrong, but my argument back would be, at least with deGrom, he hasn't been healthy for almost 3 years.
I know.
I mean, he goes through this, and we see stretches of games where he's deGrom and he's the best pitcher in baseball, and then all of a sudden it's like deGrom scratched with a minor shoulder thing, and then he's out for 2 months again. He's Clayton Kershaw, the same thing. With the Dodgers, Kershaw's constantly in and out of the lineup, best pitcher in the game, but he's constantly in and out of the lineup. Scherzer, not so much. We don't really see Scherzer have these kind of injuries, but he is getting older now, right? He's 37, 38, whatever he is. So, I mean, it's possible that he's got some breakdown. I just think Atlanta is just more, their players are more in their prime, and they're just a better all-around team. Ultimately, I think that they're the best team in the East. And the Mets and Phillies are wild card teams.
Should be very interesting to see how that plays out. Now, I do want to get to some of the starting pitching concerns.
Yeah,
Phillies are running into.
I was going to say this is something I wanted to talk with you about too. I'm glad you got it on the list.
All right, so I do want to get to that, but I think I want to just clear the offense first. So I do want to talk about something that has become a little bit worrisome or bothersome, and I'll start by saying that through 2 months, Kyle Schwarber was terrible.
Awful.
Just awful. He was driving the ball at times, but the average is just blatantly, it was just unacceptable. And the walk rate was there, but it wasn't enough to offset the batted ball production. The numbers just don't stack up. And then he goes crazy this month. And he has 7 home runs, 5 doubles. The OPS is over 1,000. He's hitting .284 in June. Season saved. He's on pace for 40-plus home runs. Looks like a great signing. So we all feel good about this. And I don't really want to talk about Kyle Schwarber, but I bring up Kyle Schwarber because for 2 months we weren't feeling very good about him, and now you kind of look at the big picture and say, this is good, this plays. Nick Castellanos, I know that he was not brought here to play right field, and so I can't ding him all that much for his lack of range and poor arm. But I will just say, as a general observation, Sunday included, there was a ball, I believe it was once Knebel. Was it when Knebel was in the game, or I think Nelson was still in the game and they had to go to Knebel? Ball goes out to right field. And I mean, just, how do you not make that play? No extension, no range. And that, it bothers me, but that's not what they signed him for, so okay. But what they did sign him for is to produce offensively. And I was all in on Nick Castellanos. I just think the guy is a really good hitter. He's been a consistent hitter throughout his career. He's an extra base hit machine. And I can't tell you how unimpressed I've been with him this season. And I've tried to work myself into it. And I can twist myself into a pretzel trying to come up with some optimistic numbers. I feel like you watch him day in, day out, and you're not really that impressed, but you're like, all right, the last 15 days, he's hitting .288. That's pretty good. But in the month of June, I mean, he's hitting .227. He's slugging .288. He has 4 extra base hits during the month of June, no home runs.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Let's get it going here.
It's the Ben Simmons house. That's the problem. He moved into Ben Simmons' house. That's got to be it, right? I mean, It's all the bad mojo. He said he hasn't felt like himself all year. Well, that's why. No, but you're right. I mean, and I it's weird. Baseball players are strange, and they are creatures of habit. We talked about this a couple years back. Remember when we were arguing about the consistency of a lineup and being in the same lineup spot, and just how certain guys feel better batting in certain spots, right? Mm-hmm. And it's probably why Bryce Harper never leaves the number 3 spot, because even though there were times when we thought maybe it would be better to bump him up to 1 or 2, he never has, because I think it's more he's got that comfort level there. That's not to say Nick Castellanos needs to be somewhere else in the lineup because it needs to make him more comfortable. But by playing right field every day, which is a position that he probably knows he's not good at, and even though we're not reminding him of it on a daily basis, right, that probably weighs on him.
I agree.
And that probably, what I'm saying, and because of that, he wants to be this stud player, and he feels like he can't be that stud player because of his shortcomings in the field. And I think that affects him. Now, he's not been, like you said, he's not been horrible, but he's not been worth his contract to this point. Do I believe he'll figure it out? I still do. I mean, like you said, you could look at spurts. He goes through spurts in the season, and it's like, oh wow, well, there you go. Well, that's Nick Castellanos. I mean, he was that. Remember, at the beginning of the year, he was that when Harper was playing in the field, and he was kind of in the role that he was supposed to be in. Splitting time in left field and mostly DHing, right? When you look at that breakdown, but then once it was, since what was it, May 31st? Was that when Harper went out of the lineup?
Well, Harper went out in late April.
April 30th. I'm sorry. April 30th. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I knew it was the end of the month. Yes, but when you look at it from that point forward, I think that's where you look at Castellanos' numbers and you go, okay, that's where it went bad. Because on April 30th, Nick Castellanos was hitting 300, 374 on base, 849 OPS. And then since then, what's it been?
Well, so I actually have that. So since May 1st, you take his production over the last 45 games, and he's hitting 232 with a 650 OPS.
Yeah.
Four home runs since the beginning of May. He has 2 home runs in his last 110 at bats. So there's just been no power whatsoever. And I mean, to kind of just further go into this, you look at slugging percentage. It was in the mid 500s, I believe, last season. Slugging percentage was 576 last year. And I'm not asking him to slug 576 this season, but he's slugging 401 this season. And the expected outcomes are, again, they're better than what they've been. And so there is definitely room in there. But you have to hope that it's coming. And I will say, to his credit, he has had to battle, as you've mentioned, through this positional situation, probably takes some of those defensive shortcomings into his at-bats. We used to talk about this with Alec Bohm all the time. But to his credit, the numbers aren't god-awful. Like, we're not talking about a guy right now that's hitting 210 either. I mean, right. He's still hitting 253. It's just the power numbers haven't been there. And
so let's just for kicks, right? I mean, you mentioned, like you said, the last 15 games, but he had the last 2 games were not great. Obviously, he was 0 for 5 in the game that they won Saturday night, and then he was 0 for 3 yesterday, or Sunday rather, when they lost. But before that, if you go from the Milwaukee series, from June 7th to June 17th, we're talking about a 10-day stretch. He hit 341, 396. And then, yes, there's no power, but he did have 4 doubles, 828 OPS. Like, you give me that, I'm okay.
Yeah, he hit it's funny. I actually just took your sample size here. That first Milwaukee game through the 8-7 win on Friday night. So just get rid of Saturday and Sunday, and it starts to look good. He was hitting 341 over a 12-game stretch with an 828 OPS. Again, a lot of singles in there and stuff, but I'm saying, is that a cleanup hitter?
Traditional? No, because he's not giving us the power. But you know what I'm saying? What if you would you be opposed to this idea? What if you? And I'm serious.
Let him lead off.
No. But flip him with Hoskins. Hoskins has shown he's hitting for power. Now, granted, I think Hoskins is the beneficiary of getting the pitches because Harper's behind him. But because Hoskins has kind of been going a little bit better lately, maybe you put Castellanos into that spot and say, let's see if Castellanos gets better pitches to hit because Harper's behind him.
Well, given the way that they're winning games right now and that from a big picture perspective, the offense has still been pretty productive, I probably don't do anything right now.
Right.
But things have cooled a little bit. You get Bryce Harper back in the lineup, see where you're at. If this were to kind of continue where they go into a prolonged stretch where they're not really consistently scoring runs again, I do think that that's maybe something you look at. But as it is right now, I have to, I think, apply the if it's not broke, don't fix it principle to it.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's pivot to the pitching situation here. And I guess let's start with the starters, which Zach Eflin, I tweeted out a couple weeks ago that I think he's tremendously underrated. We've talked about him a lot on this show. I really like him when he's healthy. I certainly like him a lot. Sometimes he leaves you wanting a little bit more, but I think by and large, guy's a pretty damn good pitcher. That being said, the other night, I guess against the Marlins 2 starts ago, he got himself into some trouble very early on in the game, and then he settled in and was great. I believe he went 6 innings, gave up 4 runs on the first inning, and he only needed 55 pitches to get through his final 5 innings of that game, and he comes out. And we all said, well, what the hell's going on? Why is he out of the game? What are they doing? And then they go on to lose. And then we come to find out that there was a little bit of a knee flare-up. He gets checked out. Everything looks okay. He goes to make his next start. Phillies say after Sunday's start that the plan all along was to keep him at about 3 innings, which I think in and of itself is a little bit of a concern. But he was not even able to do that. Now, we all kind of hold our breath. We're recording this very early on Tuesday morning, so we don't have news on him yet. By the time you listen to this, there may be news on him. Given the injury history, given what we know about his knees in the past, I am a little bit nervous that this is going to be more than just he might have to skip a start or we're going to just keep a close eye on him. What's your sense of this? Because on Sunday, the velocity wasn't terrible, but he could not drive the ball down in the zone and he got crushed.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and far be it from me to give credit to guys who talk on the radio, right? But I was listening to John Ritchie on WIP talk about patella tendon injuries. And he said that, everybody talks about ACLs and MCLs and this and that, and he's like, they're such long to recover, long recovery times for those injuries. He says, but I'll tell you, patella tendons ruin careers more than the ACLs do. He says they just do. He says guys can't put the weight that they need to constantly on that leg to kind of, whether it's a push-off or plant for a pitcher, doesn't matter. You got to put so much weight on it, especially with the torque that you're throwing with from your upper body. He said it could be something that will be degenerative and not ever really get better, even though there's been surgery. He says you'd almost rather a guy miss a year with an ACL and come back, because a lot of times when you come back from that, you're just as good as you were before.
Yeah.
He says those patella injuries, he says it's just where it is in the knee. He says, and you look at every sport, anybody who's had it, tell me who's had a great career after having that kind of surgery. And he says it's hard to find them. And so I sit there and, it's a concern. It's a concern. And it's funny because, you think about it, Eflin's, I guess, considered the 5 pitcher right now, mostly because of that, mostly because he's pitched the fewest innings of any of their main starters. But overall, his numbers are still really, really good, despite the fact that he gave up those 4 runs in the first inning, despite the fact that he couldn't get through 2 innings. He's still got a whip of 1.19.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he's still been one of their more effective pitchers, probably their 3rd best pitcher behind Nola and Wheeler. Like, it's crazy to me that, that as even when he's had his bad moments this year, that goes to show how good he is when he's on. So I don't know. I'm fingers crossed. I'd like to see that maybe. Is it a thing where if you just shut him down for a couple weeks, just put him in that like 10 or 15? I don't know how the IL thing works anymore. It's so crazy. But like give him a couple weeks and then bring him back and he's okay. And then we go, okay, he only missed a couple starts and now he's going to be healthy again. I don't know. So that's where I am concerned.
There's 3 options here. He just comes back right away, and just a hiccup. He's all right. He pitches through it, and to what results, who knows? Or he misses 3 weeks. They try to rest him, and then you come back and you kind of wait and see where you're at. I mean, those are the three paths that we're looking at here. Yeah. None of them feel like one in which, in his next start, like, do you foresee Zach Eflin getting the ball? I hope that we play this a week from now for his sake, for the Phillies' sake. And this sounds like one of the dumbest things ever said on a podcast, but do you foresee Zach Eflin getting the ball against the San Diego Padres this weekend and going 7 innings? Because that doesn't feel like what we're heading towards here.
I know it doesn't feel that way, Bob.
I hope it is, because I will say this. I mean, I've had an opportunity to talk a lot of these guys. You like some of them more than others. I like Zach Eflin a lot. I like him from a personal standpoint. I think he really does have the makeup of a pitcher that can really slot in the middle of a rotation and have a nice career. But there are some serious question marks looming over him right now.
Yeah, I the only thing that I can think of, Bob, is does he make a push to give one more start just because it's San Diego?
Because it's San Diego, maybe.
Well, I mean, it's the team he came up with, right?
I just think that all gets taken out of his hands. I mean, he can want whatever he wants. I think the Phillies ultimately are going to look at the medical.
Well, sure, but what if he says he feels okay, kind of thing? Like, pitchers can lie their way into a start sometimes.
Well, and I wonder to what extent that just happened. I do, and I know the Phillies went in with the plan of 3 innings or so they say after the fact, but you can't continue to give the ball to a guy that isn't going to get you through 5 innings. It just isn't going to work. So I'm very curious to see how this plays out. I believe that those examinations are going to take place today on Tuesday, so we might get an indication of how that comes out by tonight, maybe sometime Wednesday, but we'll know here shortly what's going to happen with him, at least in the short term, and you just hope at the very least this isn't going to be a prolonged issue that keeps him off the field or limits his effectiveness. I will say that from a greater picture, it does kind of beg the question. You have Aaron Nola here, you have Zach Wheeler here. 2 years down the line, you're expecting an Andrew Painter, maybe Mick Abel. Where does this rotation, how does this team kind of deal with its starting pitching situation moving forward long term? Like, they have a big question they need to answer about Zach Eflin. Is this a guy that they invest in long term? And for this season at $5.5 million, that's all fine and well. Next year they have a mutual option at $15 million. I would imagine that Zach Eflin would probably pick that up. With the Phillies, I don't know at this point. And then in 2024 he's an unrestricted free agent. So where do the Phillies go with Zach Eflin long term? And I do wonder. Somebody actually jumped into my Twitter feed the other day about Eflin while things were going on Sunday, and he says, this is why, and I forget who it was, but they're like, this is why you can't commit to him. He's a good pitcher, but would you really be willing to go 4 or 5 years with this guy at $15 million per when you just don't know how the knees are going to hold up? And it's a fair question.
Well, I'm not certain that I can commit to a long-term contract at this point. I just obviously can't, right? But can you say, all right, we'll pick up that option for 1 year at $15 million, and you take the chance next year. Obviously depends on how things go with him physically the rest of this year. But I think you take that chance next year, and then I think you use that as the determining factor moving forward. Is this a guy that we can lock in for, maybe you don't go with a 5-year deal. Maybe you go, look, Zach, we love you. We'll pay you something that you're probably worth, but we can't give you that term because we just don't know of your health history.
Right.
Maybe you come in and say, we'll give you another 2 years with a 3rd-year option, and we'll see how it goes.
Right.
And we'll just play it by ear after that. Maybe you do something like that. I mean, I think if you like the guy, if you believe in the guy, if you believe in his stuff, and I feel that the Phillies do. I feel that they really do like it.
Mm-hmm.
Then maybe that's how you work it. And if you're Zach Eflin and his agent, you almost have to look at it and say, yeah, they're right. Like, it's kind of hard for you to sit there and argue that.
I don't know. I mean, I know he likes it here. I think he's a good fit with the organization. And as I said, we're talking about this from the Zach Eflin perspective, just the human standpoint of this. I mean, I hope it works out. And for the Phillies, it creates a significant problem, because one of the things that we've talked about on this show right from the jump was that we like the starting rotation, and it has played to that. The rotation's been really good. I think obviously they've had some hiccups here and there. Guys have had their struggles, but you take the whole picture and you have to like what this rotation's done. Now, though, the depth becomes a problem, and they have none. And Bailey Falter throws in the doubleheader against the Nationals, and I have to be honest with you, there are some people out there that really like Bailey Falter and think that there's a future there, and there may be. But for a team that's trying to chase down a playoff spot right now, I don't know how excited I am about the prospect of Bailey Falter taking the ball every 5 games.
Well, I mean, but I guess the question is, and I agree with you, I don't think that he's a guy that you can rely on for the rest of the year, but is he a guy you can rely on for a month?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're looking at about 5-6 weeks here before the trade deadline, so he makes 6 or 7 starts for you maybe before the trade deadline, and I hear you when you say, all right, well, we're not asking him to take the ball 17, 18 times here, but at the same time, when you look at the way that this race, I know we're early here, I don't know if race is even the right word, but the way this thing is shaping up, you do wonder at the end of the season, if those 6 or 7 starts, if they're not great, what type of impact that'll have on how things kind of settle here. So, I guess the other question is, if not him, then who? And you take a look through the Phillies minor league system right now, and you like some of the stuff in A, and then the rest of it is just kind of what is there. And so I think the only other immediate option they would have would be taking somebody like Christopher Sanchez, stretching him out, and trying to get 4 or 5 innings out of him at the beginning of games. So the options are not great. And so not only are you worried about this from Zach Eflin's standpoint, losing his production, but then what replaces it? And the drop-off there could be quite significant.
Yeah. No, there is no other option. And like we've discussed this, right? I mean, there's none. There's zero. I mean, they got the guy maybe. And, we saw that minor trade they made, a week and a half ago or so with the Giants where they sent Austin Wynns, the catcher, out there, and they got Michael Plasmeyer back. I think Plasmeyer's gave them 2 decent starts at AAA. Not to say that he's an answer, but maybe you can piecemeal it and say, okay, well, between Falter and Plasmeyer, we can kind of get by until the trade deadline. I mean, that's the only other name I think, Bob, and why make that trade otherwise?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only other thing I can think of. That's a guy that they look at and say, hey, if we need a spot start, that's who we're going to rely on. But yeah, they're going to have to if Eflin. If this is an injury concern, they're going to have to go out and get a starting pitcher before the deadline.
Yeah,
and a starting pitcher akin to what they did last year with Kyle Gibson. Yeah.
One other bit of joy I want to touch on here. Corey Knebel lost his spot as this team's closer, and we kind of felt that was inevitable, and it has now happened. And he comes in and he's pitched some really high leverage spots since, including Sunday, where he's basically in the game before the 5th, and it has not gone particularly well for Corey Knebel. And I'm actually amazed looking at his numbers that he has a 3.62 ERA. I've always kind of been results oriented. And there's a lot of pushback that ERA isn't a good indicator of a pitcher's success, but I always think there's something to be said. Yeah, there's always something to be said, though, for having a decent ERA, I think. I think it's more valuable than a lot of people do. But, man, you look at it and you say 3.62, feels like this guy's pitching with an 8.4 ERA right now.
I mean, his ERA plus is actually 1.12.
I mean,
so he's better than the average. Even as bad as he's been, he's better than the average relief pitcher in Major League Baseball.
Well, I'll tell you why, though. Because in April he had a .96 ERA, and in 9 innings, I mean, he gave up 1 earned run. He held opponents to a 188 batting average. And I know in June it's actually been similar. I mean, opponents are only hitting 200 against him, but he has walked. I mean, his walks, 9 walks in 6 1/3 innings pitched this month, and he was bad in June.
But he's bad in May. But that's what I'm saying, and this is why his ERA stays relatively normal. He's given up 23 hits, and he has 22 walks.
That's amazing.
So it's all walks. It's all the walks. If he could just get control, he'd be okay as a guy in the pen. He has no confidence. He can't throw that curveball at all. So he just becomes, a fast. Guys are just waiting for a fastball in a juicy spot against him. That's really what it's become. He's got no second pitch. So that's the issue with Corey Knebel right now. and it's not a good one.
And what's a shame is that, he loses the game against the Marlins, loses the job. He comes back Friday night and gives them a really good inning. I mean, clean inning, no walks, no hits, strikes out 2, and you go, okay, this is exactly why you do this. There's something there. This guy has all-star level talent. He's going to just figure it out. And you feel really good about his effort on Friday night. And then 2 days later, they go to him in a big spot. Phillies are trying to chip back into that game, and he just can't do it.
Yeah.
And
he can't.
You just feel like you're back at square one with him right now.
Yeah, I do. It's interesting. Like, it's funny because, look, they rely on a guy like Brad Hand a little bit more now, right? They say, well, Brad Hand's had a pretty good season. He's had a couple of games where he's been terrible, but for the most part, he's been reliable. But if you look at Brad Hand compared to Corey Knebel, it's not that different. It's not that different. It's one less walk per 9 innings. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. And yet Brad Hand with his 2-2-1, okay, yeah, we can put him in late game situations. And Knebel's like, oh God, no, we can't have him in those high leverage situations anymore until he figures it out. I'm as much as I complain about Corey Knebel and say I'm done with him, I am okay with still working it, see if he can figure it out, see if he can.
They have no choice. They have to. I mean, they just have nothing out there.
Yeah, well, obviously you got Dominguez, right? Who's now probably your closer. I would hope for the rest of the way, unless he implodes. You know what? I bring him up every once in a while, Bob, and I still I think that we're starting to see it now. I think Connor Brogdon's kind of ready for one of those more late inning, 7th or 8th inning roles. He has had his moments where it's like, oh man, Connor, you just gave up a bad home run on a bad pitch. But he, for the most part, when he comes in, and I forget what game it was, he came in a tight spot. If it was against Washington? Was it against Washington in one of the doubleheader games? I think it was maybe the second doubleheader game. I forget if that was the game, but he came in a tight spot and got out of it. Like really high leverage kind of spot for him. I think you could get by with Brogdon and Hand for now, and then maybe go out and get a reliever or two. And if Knebel figures it out, then all of a sudden you got 5 guys out there, and Bilotti's not terrible if you need to go to him as an emergency guy. He's okay. The bullpen then becomes viable to me.
Yeah, I mean, Brogdon pitched on Friday in the first game, I believe. The one 5-3. I think he came out for a second inning, so it was an inning and a third. And I mean, his last 9 appearances now, taking a look at this, he's allowed a run in 1 of them. So, I mean, Connor Brogdon has done a nice job. You go back to 2020, I was talking about how I thought he was going to be their setup man and somebody that you can really trust in late in games with leads, and it hasn't really materialized, or not yet, and it's starting to now. So, yeah, I do think you feel good about that. I think Andrew Bilotti's done a respectable job for them, but not somebody I'm getting excited about in huge situations on a consistent basis. So, kind of, hey, I just kind of feel like they are winning right now, and that's all fine and well, but it's the same conversation that we've been having for a few years. You don't feel great about center field, even though Matt Vierling and Herrera, I think, give you a nice little split out there for the time being. I don't think it's a long-term solution, but maybe you get through the year with it. But they need a 5th starter probably at this point, or at least a little bit more rotational depth, with or without Zach Eflin, to be honest. I mean, I just think that they need to address this in a more meaningful way. And maybe somebody that if he's not starting, then he's in the bullpen. A guy that you could swing back and forth that has a little versatility. Or maybe that guy does become Ranger Suarez in the long run. Right. I know we've talked about that, and I know there's concerns about stunting his growth and development as a starter if you do that. But this team's in a position where they have to maximize whatever it is they do have. So, yeah, I think that's another concern. And then they have to add in some, again, I'll use the word meaningful. They have to add in a meaningful way to the back end of this bullpen. And if Sir Anthony Dominguez is your closer, they need an effective setup guy. And if Corey Knebel figures it out, that's a bonus at this point. But I don't think you can bank on, hey, he'll figure it out, and that's your 8-9 tandem.
No, not at all. And that's why I said I still think you need to add at least 1 arm to this bullpen, maybe 2 before the deadline. And I think you look at these guys and you say, all right, so let's say you add an arm. Let's say you add an arm, and you have Dominguez. The arm that you add, you assume like a late inning type, high leverage spot kind of guy. Mm-hmm. And then you say, okay, the next tier down is, Hand and Brogdon. Okay, that's not terrible. Knebel starts to figure it out, even if he never gets back to, all-star caliber, but he gets, to be somewhat efficient. Okay, that's like a sixth inning kind of guy, and then you have a Bilotti, and then who knows, maybe Sam Coonrod can come back and throw. He could be a guy that you can go to in like a fourth or fifth inning kind of thing. That's not a terrible bullpen. Is it the best bullpen in the world? No. But it's one that can you survive with? Can you be a contender with? Can you go into a playoff with? Yeah, it's not the best, but it's you make do with what you have. And like you said, if it ends up being at Rangers, Suarez ends up going back into that role that he had last year and succeeds there too, maybe that helps as well. So I think there are ways of making this bullpen better without going crazy. Maybe you add one big name arm before the deadline. But I think it's workable. Let's put it that way. I just don't want to see any more Jose Alvarado. I don't want to see any more Jeurys Familia. I've had it. I mean,
well, strap in because you're going to. Those guys aren't going anywhere.
No, it's ridiculous. Those two are just ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't want to see it. All right, I know we got to wrap things up here, Bob. Two things I wanted to tell you my funny Peacock story, and then I got one last thing for you.
You got it.
So the funny Peacock story is Sunday. Obviously, Sunday is softball Sunday for the Sanfilippo family, and we have a new sponsor. And the new sponsor bar is great bar. You got TVs everywhere, right? It's awesome. We're gonna go. Phillies are on early, right? They're at an 11:30 game, right? And so it's like, all right, well, we'll go watch the Phils. Just sit down. We had a nice doubleheader sweep. We played well. We're gonna go watch the Phils. And we get to the bar, and the bar's like, where are the Phillies? Where are the Phillies? I'm like, oh, it's on Peacock. Now, they have Xfinity in the bar. So I said, we just got to find the app. Well, they don't have the app for Peacock. And we're like, oh, man. Like, we're coming back to the bar, and they came and watched the Phillies, right? And all it's on is golf. And then I got the idea, and I said, I'm like, it's a shame you guys don't have, like, a Chromecast. Because I said, I have Peacock on my phone. And the bartender, she goes, I have a Chromecast in my car. I said, what? She said, yeah. She said, I just happened to have it in my car. She's like, I was supposed to put it on my TV and forgotten. It's been in the trunk of my car for forever. I'm like, do you want to go get it? And she's like, yeah. And so they put it in the back of the TV. Casting from my phone at the bar so everybody can watch the Phillies game.
Local hero, Anthony.
I was a hero. Of course, they got their ass kicked, so it didn't matter, right? So that was my Peacock story. One last thing, and this is going to be something that you brought to people's attention, Bob.
Okay.
Yeah, this is something I'm going to throw it to you because this was your thing. Game 6 of the World Series in 2021 had 14 million viewers. Game 6 of the NBA Finals this year between Golden State and Boston, 13.9 million viewers. Is baseball dying?
No, I think that what we're hearing here is that there are more people illegally streaming NBA games. I guess that was the explanation. That was the blowback to that number. But no, I think it does illustrate that baseball is not in fact dead. And I will say, I mean, let's just be honest. We know from a national perspective that two really good baseball teams playing on Sunday night isn't going to draw the same type of interest as, when you have superstar matchups in the NBA. Steph Curry versus LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo and versus Steph Curry. Like, those games are just going to draw natural sports observers in. Whereas, Padres and Braves just isn't going to quite do it. Even with Acuna and a guy like Tatis on the field, when those guys are both playing. And I get that, and I concede that. But I do think that we see here that the demise of baseball, in terms of television ratings, in terms of interest, both nationally and certainly locally, are way, way overdone. You see here how the Phillies have played lately, and you see the interest in this team. I mean, I can just tell you our own website metrics. Philly stories do better when the Phillies win. I mean, the traffic, the engagement on Facebook and on social media is much more consistent. And, I mean, while it doesn't draw from a national perspective, when baseball teams are good in markets where the game truly matters, right. You could argue for 10 years the game hasn't truly mattered in Philadelphia because this team has been so bad. But you see it now, man. People care about this.
And yet, if you look at TV ratings locally.
I know.
Phillies are number 2 consistently behind the Eagles.
I know.
Consistently ahead of the Sixers and Flyers. Consistently. And as good as the Sixers have been and as poor as the Phillies have been, the Phillies still get better TV ratings than for a while.
Now, is
the
that
Flyers
because more 72-year-olds are at home on a Wednesday night? And,
yes, you could certainly
skew
I
it for the older. That, right? It's an older demographic. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, you could certainly skew to the older demographic, but people got to remember that is still a demographic.
Yeah,
I mean, those people do still exist. It's not like yes, is the main target, for demographic that you're looking at is that 21 to 54, because that's where the money is, right? If people are going to buy if the advertisers are going to be targeting those people, of course, that's your primary demographic. But there are people who religious. My mother never watched sports in her life. Since she retired, she doesn't miss a Phillies game.
Right. Well, which would lend itself to the point that, hey, those numbers are being driven by a demographic that is. I don't want to be
but that's okay. I mean, yes. So can you still make the argument that the younger generation doesn't care as much about baseball? You certainly can make that argument, but I do not think that baseball is dying. Baseball's got issues, but it's not dying.
I'll give you a different way to look at it. I mean, youth baseball is still huge. Travel baseball is huge. High school baseball is huge. Softball. I mean, I know that we're talking about different things here, but you just said, hey, at the San Filippo household, Sunday softball. Think about all of the travel softball teams and how many guys are out there playing, both young and old, guys that are just out of college, guys that are 57 years old. The game is the game, and it's not going anywhere. And this whole idea that baseball's dead, it's just this. Baseball's a flawed game. There are things that it has to figure out. There are things that it's trying to figure out as we go. And whether it does or it doesn't, I don't know. But this idea that just simply nobody cares is just untrue.
It's true. It's exactly that's my point, And I think it's funny. And and I know that my son and his friends are they're in the minority here. But we're talking about a bunch of guys who are mid-20s who all they do is sit around. And I'm on their Discord thing. I don't know how I ended up in there, but I ended up in their little Discord. It's 95% baseball conversation. And it's like 12 guys, all in their mid-20s, and they're talking about, just like us, the minutia of baseball, historical stuff, current. I mean, it's all they care about. My son's now doing a lot of research on the 1920s era of baseball. And doing stuff like it's like putting like a whole little thesis together about it just for fun. Like, I mean, this is what, and that's great, and I love it. But don't get me wrong, I'm like, I raised that kid right, okay? I did something good there.
He is your son, yeah.
Yeah, he's my kid. But I mean, it's not. He's not alone, and I do think that there are more pockets of that out there than people care to realize. Maybe we don't notice it as much here in the Northeast, but I mean, think about baseball in Florida or Texas or California, Southern California, where it's a year-round sport, Arizona. Like, I think that those places, if we went there and spent 6 months there or whatever, and we realized how important baseball really is to those communities, be like, yeah, man, there's no way this sport's dying in this country. It's fallen off a little bit, but it's not dying by any stretch of the imagination. So that was just my little baseball rant. I'm glad that you were able to agree with me.
Yeah, you get no pushback. I wish we could have more of a spirited debate. I just nod my head in agreement. So that will do it for this episode of Crossed Up. I know that we had talked about doing an episode later last week. The doubleheader on Friday, honestly, kind of took the wind out of the sails there. It would be our expectation to be back later this week with a new episode as the Phillies go to Texas for 2 games and then kick off a series with the San Diego Padres. Big week ahead. Can the Phillies sustain the momentum, or do they become the Phillies again? Stay tuned and we will find out. I'm Bob Wankel for Anthony Sanfilippo. Thanks for tuning in to Crossed Up, and we will talk to everybody soon.